This phenomenon has really grown quite extensively, but how did it all begin?
I and a friend of mine, we were very dissatisfied with the education system. So we wanted to try out a new kind of school which would help children discover what their true nature was. It was a residential school, and the whole idea was to help children become enlightened. So that was the motive in starting the school. And it so happened that some people did become enlightened. And some children became enlightened, some parents became enlightened. That is how the whole phenomenon began. I think it was the year 1989, and probably the month was August. One day my son came along and he told me, there's somebody inside me. And then I asked him, how does he look like? He said, he looks pretty young and he seems to be having a golden body. I asked him, could you ask him who he is? He said, yes, I'll ask him. He spoke to him and told me he's saying he's Prajapati. Then I said, oh, could you ask him that whether he would help you to get into others? Then he again contacted him and he said, yes, he says he's willing to get into others. So find out from him how we should go about it. And then he said, place your hands on somebody and I will go into him. So I called a few children and said, now place your hands on them. And the moment he placed his hands on them, in a moment's notice, they said, yes, we have a golden being inside us. And the same question was repeated. Ask him who he is. He said, I am Prajapati. That was how this phenomenon broke loose.
One day in the month of August, on the 17th of August, 1989, at around 7 o'clock in the evening, it was raining. Bhagavan sent word for me. So I went to Bhagavan's house, and there, a huge table, and this side was Bhagavan. That side was Bhagavan's only son, Sri Krishna ji. He was sitting there. Bhagavan told me to sit there on the opposite side. Sri Krishna ji is younger to me by 1 year. Bhagavan said, now close your eyes. Krishna will give you something. Receive it. I closed my eyes. And the moment I did, it was very strange. I felt like a light, a beam of light, a shaft of light was coming and hitting me from him. And for the first time, with my eyes closed, I could see the whole room, as though my eyes were open. And he placed his hands on my head. As soon as he did that, there was tremendous heat from the base of my spine rising to the crown of my head. Now I know it is Kundalini. And I began to see these chakras all blossoming, one after the other, and the various gods. I do not have that kind of religious background where I know who these gods are or what these chakras are about. But they simply opened up in front of me. It was an immense experience. I was dazed, I was shocked. I hadn't expected it. And then Bhagavan said I could open my eyes. When I opened my eyes, I still was not sure of what was happening. By the clock, it was only 2 minutes that this entire thing had happened. For me, it looked like a long, long time. Bhagavan said you could go and rest. I came back to my room, but the Deeksha continued. Deeksha that Krishna had given was not over in those 2 minutes' time. It continued to unfold itself rather. A few days later, when I went home in September for vacation, I was lying down in the afternoon, reading a book, waiting for my father to come back from the clinic. I just then had a very beautiful dialogue with my mother. I was lying down on the sofa, and suddenly there was something very warm in the heart, and it felt like being transparent, and there I could see Bhagavan. You must know, we still did not call Bhagavan as Bhagavan, we used to call him Sir. So it was very amazing to me. How is it that Sir is in my heart? And then Bhagavan began to speak from within. It was as audible as this, so physical. I was not afraid, but it was fun. It felt very nice that Sir was within me and he was talking to me. And throughout the vacation, many strange experiences. Whenever I wanted to see Amma, as soon as the desire ended, all that I had to do was ask, Sir, I want to see Amma. Immediately my astral body would be out, and there I would be at Jeevashram. I would know exactly the sari that Amma was wearing that day, to whom Amma was speaking. And in fact, when I went there, Amma would also tell people who were around that I had come. The distance, physical distance, had disappeared.
It was the night after I received my first Deeksha from Bhagavan's son, Sri Krishna ji. I was sleeping in my dormitory with few of my other classmates. We were about 10 or 12 sleeping in the dormitory. I saw Bhagavan walking into our dormitory. It's the first time I'm seeing Bhagavan in my vision. But it didn't look like a vision. It was very, very real. And I was wondering, what is the directors are doing in our dormitory so late in the night? Because still, I did not know who Bhagavan was. Bhagavan walked up to me. I was sleeping. He woke me up. He said, Giri, wake up, wake up. Bhagavan was looking at me, and Bhagavan spoke these few words to me. Bhagavan said, Giri, isn't it time for you to change into cotton now? He spoke these few words. I was sleeping in my regular dress, my shirt and my trousers. Just woke me up and said, Giri, isn't it time for you to change into cotton? He spoke these few words and he walked away. I did not understand what it meant. Closed my eyes, tried to go back to sleep. And I kept hearing Bhagavan's voice saying so many other things. And I saw so many images. Next morning when I woke up, I felt very different. I felt like I was declutched from my past. I could remember everything about my past, but somehow felt far away from it. It was a very new experience to me because I did not have any spiritual background. So I went to Bhagavan and shared with Bhagavan what happened to me that night. I told Bhagavan, Bhagavan, last night you came to my room and this is what you spoke to me and this is how I feel now. Bhagavan did not speak anything. He just smiled and said, you will know it, Giri. subsequently I had so many other experiences. So that was my first experience.
What is the meaning of Prajapati, Bhagwan?
The word Prajapati means he's a guru, he's a teacher. And the children had never heard about this word earlier. None of them had heard about this word. But yet they were using this word, And then strangely, this Prajapati also grew older. He grew older by the day. He came in as a young boy, but he began to grow, And then as he grew, the phenomenon became more powerful. So finally, when the Deekshas were being given, they would take any form. Some had Rama as their antaryami, Krishna, some had Christ, some had some formless state. So various things were emerging out of the Deeksha. And a lot of strange phenomena broke loose in the campus. Like you could get all kinds of sacred smells all over the campus. You could hear sacred chanting going on, people moving into states. And this kind of thing was happening. And people passing on the road would move into states. So at that time, somehow I felt things were going out of control. And took a strong sankalpa. Sankalpa means an intent that it will be good if the phenomenon is withdrawn for some time. And then it slightly withdrew.
Bhagwan, you mentioned that people would find different Rama or Christ as antaryami. Could you explain what is antaryami?
Antaryami means the indweller who resides in your heart or in any of your chakras and to whom you could speak to. And he responds to that. You can ask him for help, he would help you out. You could pray to him, you could worship him, you could do whatever you want. He's more like a friend there helping you out. So that's how the phenomenon broke out.
And you said people were going into all kinds of states.
States, yes.
What sort of states were they going into?
People would go into states of great joy for no reason. And people would discover tremendous love for one another, for the animals, for the plants, which was not taught to people. The school was not teaching these things. But children would move into these states. We found children talking to animals, talking to trees, and getting along very well. Children healing children. And one day we found one boy, he made about 30 children stand in a queue and heal them all. He was no healer, he was a Muslim boy. He just said, line up, now I'll heal you. And he healed them all. So all this kind of things were happening.
Once this Deeksha phenomenon started, there was a tremendous transformation happening in almost all the students. And it was very spontaneous. They developed tremendous ability to heal. For many years, very rarely we had a doctor in our campus. Any sickness, any illness, they would heal each other. The children were traveling to different lokas, visiting their homes in their astral bodies, seeing what their parents were doing. When the parents came to school to take them home for vacation, they would tell mother, father, on so-and-so date you are wearing this dress, eating this food. And they asked, how did you know? And they said, we were there. And when they're hungry, they would just speak to their antaryami. And they would go to some world, eat an apple there, and they would be full. So astonishing experiences the students are having. They would go to different worlds, meet different masters, the great beings there. They would have conversations with them. This was a common thing happening. We had one student who was the most notorious one in the school. His name is Arjuna. He was a big bully. All students, his juniors and his seniors, everybody feared him. One evening, when it was time for dinner, all the students were going to the dining hall. They just rang the bell, the dinner bell. This boy was lying down in a garden. That garden was called the Buddha garden. We have the statue of Buddha in that garden, the center of the garden. I walked up to him to take him for dinner. He said he's not coming for dinner. I asked him, how come? You'll be hungry otherwise. He said, don't you see? I said, what? He said, don't you see I am taking energy from the star? He had stretched out his arm towards one of the stars in the sky. And he told me he is actually touching the star and is receiving energy from the star. Now, this was an unbelievable thing for anybody in the campus. Nobody could believe that such a transformation could happen to such a notorious boy. And everything about him had changed. He had become slow. He's always lost in some mystical world. He could speak to plants, he could speak to trees. He would look at a mango tree and he would tell us, 3 days from now that mango would be ripe. And we used to ask him, how did you know that? He said, I just spoke to the tree and the fruit appeared to me, the ripe fruit, and it's going to be that fruit. Incredible things like that.
We returned back to school and we were going for an early morning walk with Bhagavan, many of us students. So we went to a beautiful eucalyptus grove, crossed that, and the land was ups and downs. So we sat at one particular place. And then Bhagavan called Krishnaji and said, close your eyes, he'll give you something. I just closed my eyes, and this time he didn't even touch. He was just sitting there, and suddenly I felt Om, the symbol Om, with its reverberation coming and entering into me. That was the second Deeksha I received from Krishnaji. And when I told Bhagavan about my experiences afterwards, that I saw Bhagavan and Amma, or that I saw Om and all these things, Bhagavan said it sometimes happens, nothing more. There was no explanation given to anything. And what Krishnaji gave me was not something unique, because there were so many students who got this gift from Krishnaji. When somebody would speak to him, they would suddenly come in contact with this higher self or the indweller or God in their heart. People would very naturally get in touch with their God, in whatever form. People would have amazing spiritual experiences, whether he held their hand or he touched them on the head or he just spoke to them. And Krishnaji was 12. He'd completed 11 years then. Very playful, very friendly, with no spiritual airs. So the phenomenon that began that day, today is called Deeksha.
Bhagavan, tell me a little bit about the structure of the school. What was your role in the school?
I was the director of the school. I was looking into the spiritual side of the school.
I see.
On a day-by-day basis, I used to conduct classes on meditation, on spirituality, on philosophy. So I used to take such classes. So children were exposed to a very high level of understanding of the philosophy, of science, much beyond their age. And there were occasions when I also taught mathematics and history. That also used to be done.
How was the way that you taught the lessons, or the way that the school was conducted different? As well as being a school for enlightenment, I think there were many other things about the school that were unusual and revolutionary.
Yes. For example, we were not giving ranks in the school. Children were not ranked. And there was no question of detaining a child in any particular standard. Everybody automatically passed. And if the child refused to study, he would not be compelled to study. And basically what we were emphasizing was relationship among children and between the children and their parents. What we are now doing in the courses was what we were doing then. But strangely, the children also did academically very well. Today, most of them are doctors, engineers. They hold very important positions in the corporate sector. They did not end up as failures in the world either. So they are not only in a very good state of consciousness, but they're also worldly very successful.
So, but you were not putting any pressure on them to become
No
successful?
academic pressure was put on the child.
Huh.
It was never done. And the children were not scolded, and they were never beaten. And if any teacher was found being very harsh with the child, the teacher was removed from the school.
So this provides a really different model for education, because many people would say unless you discipline a child and push them through the exams, they're going to become nothing.
Yes, but then we could prove that it is not really true. But then you also had to be a teacher with enormous love. Otherwise, probably it cannot be done. Merely giving a child freedom may not fully work. He needs to have a teacher around who is completely comfortable with himself. The teacher himself must be experiencing inner freedom and inner joy, and he must relate to the child in a very different way. Then it's possible, not otherwise.
I went to visit the school with Anandagiri, your acharya, and he was showing me around, and he was telling me at the you announced the school before you had the money, before you had the students. So that was quite a bold step.
Yes, we had the buildings. Probably a year before the school started, I expressed the intent that on this date the school would start. But there was no land, there was no money, there's nothing in fact. We just approached one gentleman and told him, would you give us some land on lease? So he said, yes, you could take this land. And then we went and met some people and said, would you like to start a school like this? Some said, okay, we'll help you a little bit. So we began with just one main building. And then in a matter of 3-4 years, the school grew sufficiently big. But it exactly commenced on that date with buildings, with money, and with students.
When I visited the school, I saw one of the signs. It said it was about the education system. But I believe there were other signs also. Can you remind me what was written on some of the signs in the school?
So there were a lot of other boards. One board read, this place exists for the enlightenment of man. There was another board which said, man is mad. So there are a lot, your thoughts are not your thoughts, self is a concept. Such boards were there. But since we left the place because of the weather and the lack of maintenance, many of the boards collapsed.
What was your purpose in making these boards?
Basically, we are trying to educate the parents that the current educational system was destroying their children, and that the school must help the child discover what he or she really was. And basically, the whole focus was on making the child enlightened. We are trying to rid the child of the self and free him from all self-centered activity. That was the whole sankalpa, or the intention of the school. And finally that was achieved.
The most prominent thing when you enter the school is the large statue of the Buddha.
Yes,
right?
yes.
Was that there from the very beginning?
That was not from the very beginning, but somewhere in the middle the statue was placed there because a painter had come and very spontaneously made the statue of the Buddha. And we thought, since he symbolizes enlightenment, why not we keep him in the park?
So you started out with very few students then?
Yes.
How much did it grow? What was the maximum size of the school?
It went up to a max of 179.
Yes.
Residential students.
Yes.
And about 200 day students.
That's a big operation.
Yes. But once this phenomenon broke out, the school became so famous that it nearly became impossible to run the school anymore. And we had to focus on our spiritual work. So we shut down the school. Yeah. And now we help other schools do this kind of work.
Bhagwan, you speak a great deal about setting relationship right. What does that mean?
In this work, we have found that unless the heart cooperates, the brain does not seem to be getting the right kind of signals and not entering the right states of consciousness. And it has to do a lot with the physical heart itself. And we found unless the relationships are set right, the physical heart just does not cooperate. So the 21 days, for example, when we very often find a person not progressing, we take him out of the process, do what we call a samskara shuddhi on him. It is mainly setting right his relationships. And then once that has been set right, we see the heart is sending a different kind of signal and the person is able to get the states. So that was how we realized it is so important to set right relationships. Otherwise, the heart is just not cooperating. And without the heart, you can achieve very little.
Samskara shuddhi, what is the meaning of that word?
Samskara shuddhi is cleansing of your conditioning. Samskaras means conditioning. Shuddhi means cleansing. So we acquire a lot of conditioning over the years. And this could sometimes be a hindrance to your growth or progress. So we have a way of erasing the samskaras or the conditioning, and then you continue to make progress.
Bhagavan, what effect would we expect Deeksha to have on relationship? If someone is having trouble in relationship and they are receiving Deeksha in Europe or America in some country, and they receive Deeksha, how could we expect their relationships to change as a result?
The Deeksha can be given, and strangely the person discovers love in relationship, and the sense of separateness is gone. There's a freedom from the past, and he doesn't get hurt any longer, and he begins to enjoy the relationship.
It can happen sometimes in marriages or close relationships that people really get into a tangle where they feel hurt, they feel angry, and they have a lot of conflict. If somebody, whether it's somebody just coming newly to Deeksha, or this can even happen for people who've been giving Deeksha, that this happens still. What advice would you give? What would be like emergency first aid? What's to set these things right when it's really in conflict? What's the best way to proceed?
The emergency first aid I would give is teach them the art of listening to see what's happening inside them, and start this process and then receive the Deeksha. Then Deeksha takes you to the very end of the story that is being revealed to you all the time. And once you have listened to the story, the relationship is automatically set right. Because very often you are not listening to the story, which is playing with your relationship. And if you give it a hearing to the very end, then the story stops and the relationship naturally falls into order.
What do you mean by listening to the story? Do you mean listening to the thoughts that are running inside, or so listening to the other person?
It's not exactly thoughts, but we carry a lot of stories within us. And these stories manipulate and control relationship. And all that they need is they have to be listened to. Strangely, once they have been listened to, they lose all charge. They no more interfere with you. But people hardly listen to that. The Deeksha helps you in listening to the story. And once it has expressed itself, the hold is gone. And without that hold, the relationship very naturally falls into order. The person looks very different. I have had examples of people come and complain to me saying, we want to divorce our wives. And now I have asked them, then why did you marry her in the first instance? And they say, no, we married for money. Because in India you get a lot of money in the form of what they call dowry, So then I said, but then you can't give her up right now because you've taken the money. Yes, but then I really don't like her. I don't like her face, I don't like her complexion, I don't like her teeth. Now once they have listened to the story and they have undergone the process, the same person falls in love with her. And the relationship is set right. This happens almost every day.
As well as Deeksha, there are many other things that we know in the West to work with relationship. Things like learning skills of listening, learning skills of speaking in a more responsible way. And actually there's a lot of different courses and books about how to improve relationship through behaving differently. Do you think that is also helpful, or is Deeksha going to be enough?
Well, we could develop these skills and they would certainly be very helpful. But the Deeksha acts in a very special way. What the Deeksha does is, instead of trying to help you to understand the other, it helps you to experience the other. The moment you start experiencing the other, it does not matter who the other is. Because anything when experienced is nothing but joy. So a quarrel could actually become a source of joy. Anger could become a source of joy. So the entire thing gets converted. Now, through no technique is this possible. A Deeksha alone is capable of doing that. And the other thing is the Deeksha can often swing between a bird's eye view and a worm's eye view. It's like using the Google to see the planet and then zooming down. No? So these views keep alternating. You see that the world is in conflict. There's so much suffering and pain. As a third party, as a witness, and suddenly you zoom down to your own relationship with your wife. Then again you go back to the global point of view. When this repeats 3 or 4 times, you become completely detached and you begin to enjoy that same relationship without bringing about any change in that relationship.
My name is Brun. I live here on Samsø. We have this center called Oneness Center here on Samsø. And Samsø is a small island in the middle of Denmark.
My name is Cecil, and Brun and I are a couple. We've been together for 13 years, I think. And we have a daughter, Mila. She's 5.
Well, the story before Deeksha and after Deeksha, this is a long story. We'll try to keep it short. It started 3 years ago in 2003. I was on the Buddhist path, and Cecil was also on her spiritual path. But it was 2 different paths going in different directions, and that created a lot of suffering in our relationship. It wasn't manifested in like big quarrels, but more in a sense of separation between us, like ongoing separateness, and that kind of had a topping in a week where Cecil, she was going through a process, and she said that she wanted to go into the attic in the house and just stay there for a week, more or less, all the time. And I was taking care of Mila at that point in time during that week. And it was a very intense crisis in our relationship. And maybe Cecil, you want to just touch briefly on that?
Yeah. I think what really happened was that the pressure just kept building up. It wasn't a lot of quarrels. Like Brun said, it was just the pain of not really reaching each other and not really being able to reach out to each other. And I think it culminated because we were discussing that Brun wanted to live in New Zealand with our Buddhist teacher, and I didn't want to go. And Mila was 2 years at the time, and it was a very, very painful period. And I won't go into details of what triggered that crisis really, but what happened was that I'd been managing a similar crisis in my life, different means and in different ways, but this time it felt like all my usual managing routes were not working anymore. So I told Brun, I'm sorry, I have to go through this, I have to feel this pain, I have to face it. And so I went into this small room in the attic, and it's really the maid's room, and I just went in there, and I stayed more or less 5-7 days, only taking care of Mila a little bit, and then just crying and crying and crying, like my life just laying in pieces before me on the floor. And I realized that there's really nothing I can do with this. There's just this pain of separation, and there's nothing I can do with it. I can't fix it with therapy. I can't become more spiritual. There's nothing I can do. I've done everything I possibly can. And then I think you should pick up from here, because then something very, very strange happened. And
I was sitting in the office on the first floor in our house, and I was printing a lot of material about Arjuna Ardagh. I had received this email, and I was just printing out all this material from the website and the pictures and the stories and articles, and suddenly Cecil, she came out of the room in the attic and then went into the office, and without saying anything, she just grabbed the papers and took them and went off. And I was just like, she had never ever taken anything that I had printed before, especially not spiritual stuff.
No, especially not spiritual stuff.
So it was just like, hey, what's happening? And she took all the papers and she read them, and I read them afterwards. And the same night, it was very, very strange, because we are very picky in the spiritual supermarket. I have only had one real teacher, Buddhist teacher, and we have never had any pictures of any saints or teachers or gurus on the altar in our meditation room. But that same night we put a picture of Arjuna Bhagavan there, and it was just like we had this tremendous pull towards them, and we couldn't explain why.
Yeah, it just felt like a very, very physical pull, almost physical pull towards them. And I think there was a sort of soft healing in our relationship. I think for the first time in a very, very long time, we felt that there was something connecting us in a new way, and it was really very, very fragile, I found, but also a new beginning. And then at that time, the Diksha hadn't been released, or I don't know how to put it, but I think they were giving Dikshas to the monks and nuns in Golden City, but not publicly. So we attended what they called Mukti courses, Mukti 1, 2 and 3. And they were kind of short courses, the first two. And we attended those together, and then I went on a 7-day retreat in Sweden. That was the Mukti 3 course. And I had a very strong, very, very strong, I actually had many strong experiences on that retreat. And then immediately after that, or a month after that, Brun went to India. You can tell about that.
Yeah, and that was a very, very powerful experience, culminating in after first a 3-day process and then a 5-day process, culminating in a breakthrough where I received the state, the enlightened state. I was just like, whoa, what's happening? I had been in that state for brief moments before in my life, and I had searched for that state ever since, just feeling a sense of meaninglessness in my life if I was not in my natural state. And in that moment, in that morning where I broke through, it was just fantastic. And I felt a healing going not only through my own body, but also a healing through the relationships in my family, and especially with Cecil. Talking with her, she was like with me during the process, even though I was physically down there alone. She was very much with me down there. And there was so much healing going on in that process.
I felt this detachment of the mind stayed with me more or less when I got back, and it was very important in our relationship because I'd been taking everything very, very personally, and also identifying very, very much with the patterns going on between us, and in that sort of spaciousness with the mind not commenting all the time, it was much more fun to relate. Much more space to relate, and much more creative space, really.
When we do retreats on relationships, we use ourselves as examples, because we had a lot of programs going on between us, like patterns, relationship patterns that were quite difficult. For example, I've had this pattern going on my whole life about anger, that I resist anger. I remember it was initiated when I was 4 years old, and my father, he was repairing my bike, and he got very angry with the bike, and I got very scared from his anger, and I took a decision at that point in time saying it is wrong to be angry, and that has affected my whole life. Really, I've resisted anger in myself, and I resisted anger in other people, and of course that is what life throws at you. So I've had a brother who was very, very hot-tempered. When we were playing tennis, he threw his racket after me, and of course I've coupled up with Cecil, who is an expert in expressing anger in a beautiful way. but I could not see the beauty in it at that point in time. I was just resisting it. And the whole thing was actually taking place within me. It was not Cecil's fault that I was resisting anger. She was just like kind of matching my resistance to the anger. And that was what I had to learn in our relationship, or one of the things that I had to learn. And that was just expressed in so many ways. I was pulled into the anger zone when Cecil, she was being angry. And I was just furious. So it was an amazing example. I was standing in the office. There's a lot of things happening in that office. And I was just yelling at her. Why are you being angry? You're not allowed to be angry. I was just yelling, being furious, yelling, you're not allowed to be angry, really, or you cannot be angry. It's spoiling the whole atmosphere in the house, and da 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 da. And it's so funny. Just not acknowledging that the whole thing was taking place within me, and not through the relationship with Cecil. No, she was just showing me something that I had to be more clear about. And after the Deekshas, after the breakthrough experience, I can now experience Cecil being angry when she's angry, when she gets upset about something which is pissing her off. She's expressing that, and I can be with that without really being offended or angry about it. And I can also myself be angry without hitting myself in the head about it. The thing is that after the enlightenment experience, the frequency of being angry has gone down to 1/10, I think maybe 1/20. It's very rare that these feelings, they occur, but when they occur, they're allowed to be expressed freely. And that is the freedom in it, really. To be with what is, even though it's negative feelings, irritation, frustration, anger, you can be with what is.
Now I find it's just such a beautiful thing, because I think when you're okay within yourself, then you're completely okay with the other as well. And it's just such a beautiful, we complement each other in a very beautiful way, and it's so much fun.
One of the big problems that people face in relationship is anger. Anger builds up. Even when you love somebody, even with your husband, your wife, your boyfriend, girlfriend,
yes.
you love them in your heart, but
yes,
you start
yes.
to feel very angry, they feel angry, and then it either turns into a kind of bitterness where we turn away because we don't want to, to express the anger, or we become really angry. And either one doesn't seem good. To cut off doesn't seem good, to throw the anger doesn't seem good. How can people be with their anger?
What happens in this Deeksha process is you still get angry, you know, but I really do not know how to convey that. This is an anger which has no anger. There is an understanding where there is no understanding. So strangely, all things continue, but they have lost the sting, you know. You can get very angry with your spouse, but the other person does not feel the anger. And there's really no anger in your anger, you know. Similarly, you no more try to understand her in terms of psychology or philosophy, you know. But there is an understanding which we really cannot call understanding. So we might say it's an understanding without understanding, you know. It's something very strange. So all things are normal, but somehow the core is missing. And relationship becomes very beautiful when there's anger. The couples actually enjoy that anger, you know. Very often the wife admires the husband's anger, the husband the wife's anger. That's how it happens. Not that they're free of anger. Anger still continues, but it has become very enjoyable. But somehow we have found it more easy to communicate with the Indian people, no? We have had some difficulty with the Western people in exactly communicating what's happening. But of late we find they're also getting a hang of it.
I've talked to many people in Europe and America who've reported exactly this, that the surface appearance of the relationship looks the same. They still appear to have fights, but they say the sting is taken out. It's almost like it's watching an enjoyable movie instead of something very serious.
Because we are not trying to change the behavior, no? Suppose you have a nagging wife, we say, let her continue to nag you. There's no problem with it. That in fact is the beauty about her. And if you are a husband who's a stickler to discipline and who keeps laying down rules and regulations, continue to be with that, because that's what is most suitable to you. But the other person learns to enjoy that. So we do not aim to effect any changes in the behavioral patterns, but only changes with regard to the way you experience it. That's what the Deeksha aims at.
I think what I'm hearing you saying, Bhagwan, is that it's not the content of the relationship that causes suffering, it's the resistance to the content. Is that correct?
Exactly that.
Yeah. And so Deeksha relaxes our resistance to what is occurring.
It's not that you're free of anger, but you have made friends with anger. You go along with it, you have no more problems with it. It's not that you have stopped being jealous, but you're very comfortable with being jealous. You accept it totally. So there's no change in the content. It's only in your approach to the content that there's a radical shift.
If someone really has made friends with jealousy, or made friends with anger, so they feel very comfortable with that anger, this anger could still offend somebody else or cause hurt to somebody else, couldn't it?
Yeah, that doesn't happen. Once you made friends with your anger or your jealousy and you express it, it does not hurt the other at all.
I see.
The other is quite contented with relating to it. Is in fact happy with it.
Maybe because it has no more charge behind it.
There's no charge behind it.
Yes.
My partner and I, we did the process together, and so of course that also makes it's a process in itself to just be together in it. And in one particular Deeksha I was actually through intense action by doing something I didn't feel he should do, I didn't want him to do, where I got really triggered and basically totally angry. And there I could really finally experience what I've been hearing all my life, what everybody says, invite the pain and it will transform into joy, or there will be only experience but no experience. All these things which had been before basically words to me, I could finally experience because I just let that anger be there, not react to it, not act with it, but just let it become as big as it wanted to. At some point I even felt I would die, but even that would have been okay because I was, ready to give myself to it, and it became so strong and almost unbearable and horrible and black and thick. And suddenly it just, I don't even know the moment, but suddenly it was gone. And then that feeling of from now on, whatever life gives me, it will be just an experience, and it won't be. It just will be a bliss to experience something. If it's painful or uncomfortable or beautiful, it will just be a joy of experiencing. And even later, I felt, like I'm quite shy or shameful, that I do certain things because I hold back in certain things because I'm afraid of being, over the top or being, I don't know, that I shouldn't do these things. So being too much. And even then, after I could feel, okay, now I'm too much, and then I enjoy the feeling of being ashamed. That's also fine, So even then I could suddenly be much more free, and so that was a huge, huge, huge revelation for me. Very, very grateful for that.
Well, let's speak about that a little bit, about emotions like jealousy, anger, or grief, feeling of loss. Now, I think there's a variety of attitudes which spiritually oriented people have to these feelings. One attitude is that these feelings are kind of unenlightened feelings. So if you are coming more into enlightenment, more into oneness, then feelings like jealousy will disappear. No jealousy is remaining. Similarly, I heard a story once from a devotee of an Indian guru, and he was telling me with great pride that when somebody very close to this guru died,
Yes.
but the guru showed no grief at all.
Yes.
And I was wondering, this is a strange thing.
Yes.
So these feelings like jealousy,
Yes.
grief, anger, or particularly jealousy is interesting. Is this a natural feeling which is hardwired into us as human beings?
This jealousy is a natural feeling, which, as you said, is wired into the system. But the thing is, you could experience jealousy itself. When you start experiencing jealousy itself, it becomes a very enjoyable experience. So we are not talking about being free of jealousy here. We are only talking of enjoying jealousy. That's what Deeksha is all about. So you are very natural. You are jealous. You are very concerned when your wife is going along with somebody else. But strangely, even that can be enjoyed. And the Deeksha takes you to such a level, what I call the bird's eye view. When you take the worm's eye view, jealousy causes pain. But when you take the bird's eye view, the same jealousy gives you joy. So much so that it is as though jealousy has disappeared. That's what happens.
I'm just thinking, for someone hearing this for the first time, it might sound kind of confusing. How is it possible to enjoy jealousy? How is it possible to enjoy feelings like grief?
What actually happens is, like, you could have in your drawing room a $1 million painting of a woman in grief. Now, you enjoy that painting because you are not that woman in grief. And it costs $1 million to buy that painting and you hang it in your living room. Something similar is happening here. When I talk of bird's eye view, you are moving out of the situation and looking at it as though you're a third person. When that happens, your own jealousy, your own grief is like that painting, which you start admiring. And this is what we call witnessing, and or the bird's eye view. In this stage, anything that happens just gives you joy. There's no place for suffering there. On the other hand, if you get involved, even a joy situation can bring about pain. So this is all about getting out of the situation and looking at it.
When you speak, you remind me of a very great film that was made in America a few years ago called American Beauty. And it won the Oscar.
I see.
And this film, it was actually all about different kinds of suffering, frustration, boredom. But when people would leave the movie theater, they would feel full of the divine for a reason they couldn't explain.
Yes.
And this film was very much giving this bird's eye view, seeing that all this is happening, but somehow it's happening in a bigger context. I think that's what you're speaking, isn't it?
Yes, exactly that. This is what we also call oneness, because when this happens, you see the suffering of mankind. You see their suffering all over the world, and you become so aware of it. And your own personal suffering is just a small speck in that. And it ceases to be personal. So when I talk of freedom from suffering, I'm only talking of freedom from suffering as personal suffering, not suffering as such.
So you can still feel the pain of the world and still feel compassion.
Yes, you could feel that. Now, my own mother died on my lap. So, but then, there was no personal suffering. But there was suffering, But it was not personal.
Could you explain that a little more? So you felt suffering, but not personal suffering.
I felt suffering because I could see she did not want to go.
So you felt her suffering?
Yes,
then.
and there were others around who didn't want her to leave them. So they were all suffering. So that did affect me, but not as a person. Not that it was my mother who was passing away. It didn't affect me that way. But of course, I helped her out, and then she finally passed away very joyfully. So it's a question of shifting your stance from being involved to being a witness.
How old were you when your mother died, Bhagwan?
That must have been 5 years ago. I must have been 52, I think.
Oh, I didn't ask you. Now you've told me how old you are now. I didn't know.
I'm 57 now.
You're kind of timeless as well. That's how I feel you. So when your mother died, for you there was no grasping or grieving?
No, it wasn't there. Because it was not my mother, That kind of stand was not there, I see a beautiful being who has helped me so much passing away, and I know where she's going also. So in a sense, I am happy. But I see the others in tremendous grief. That is affecting me again.
Namaste. How are you, everybody? Hola. My name is Nahuel. I'm from Argentina. I'm a musician, and I'm here right now in front of you. I'm gonna try to explain my experience in how I experienced pain for the first time in my life. Really experienced pain. It's very hard to explain something like that. You have to experience it, definitely. Bhagavan always told us that, no? Life has to be experienced and not explained. And definitely, I agree with that. First of all, well, I would like to say to you that my pain, the pain that was there was the pain of losing my mother 4 years ago. She died on a heart disease in September 2001, and the pain was there, but how I realized in the experience was not a psychological pain, was a physical pain. No? Then I realized that when your mother is gone, when the body of your mother is no more, you experience this because it's like a part of your body is missing. It's like losing an arm or losing a leg. No? So I remember that night. I was with my sister in the room, and we prepared to see the video. We start the process, the 21-day process. At the moment the video starts, I start to feel like a stillness in my body, and the body start to weep. The body start. I'm gonna use this word, the body, because I was not weeping. The body was weeping, shaking, and so after seeing the video, I was completely in that state, and I went to the other room, and then it happens. I mean, I asked for Diksha Bhagavan, let me experience this pain completely, and then this pain, completely suppressed by me all these years, emerged. This tiger was finally there. I was face to face with the tiger, and the tiger ate me. I jumped into the tiger's mouth, and was amazing. Was very liberating. My body was, for 45 or 50 minutes, I was looking the body weeping and convulsing and shaking. I remember my only words, I was shouting, no? I miss you, mother, I miss you, I want to see you, I miss you, I want to see you. At the same time, joy came and peace came, and I saw my mother putting her hand in my head, no? Like, relax, son, I'm here, you know? But that was not enough. I want to see you, I want to see you. I miss you, no? So I was in the bathroom, I put my head in front of the mirror was there. I look at the mirror, and then in the mirror I saw my mother's face. Very clear, no? The same expression that she always looked at me with a look that only a mother can look a son, no? That expression only a mother can have. And she looked at me in the mirror, and I smiled, she smiled, and I could hear the words in my head. She said to me, you can see me every time you see yourself in the mirror. You are part of my body. And I started to cry again, but this time the crying was full of happiness, because it felt so real, no? She's living. She's probably she's living more now than ever, and that was experience, no? I experienced this pain completely, and I mean, it's true what Bhagavan says, no? If you experience the pain completely, the suffering completely, there's, you can remember, as now I'm remembering, I'm sharing with you, but it's no more charge, it's no more, the negative energy is no more there bothering you. And it's amazing. It's like not carrying any more, this weight, A lot of you, maybe you lose your mother or your father or a grandfather or something very close to you. Be sure that they are happy. They are happy, and be sure that they know about you. They can see you. They can hear you. They can share with you all that you are living. And that's amazing. Bye.
Now, you emphasize here in the 21-day process, particularly the relationship with mother and father.
Yes.
I know many people, I could perhaps even say most of the people who I know where I grew up have not good relationship with the mother or the father. It's actually a rare thing in my culture to have really good relationship with either of your parents. So why is this so important? Could you explain? Many people, they've solved the problem by cutting the relationship, and they think that's the solution.
Yes.
But why is it so important to set right relationship, particularly with mother and father? Could you speak about each one?
Yes. It's as though that that is the foundation for all relationships. Now, let's say you had a bad relationship with your father. It's likely to affect your relationship with your boss, or sometimes with your co-workers, or even with your spouse. So it's as though it is the basic relationship which affects all other relationships. So that is why we have found that once we have set this right, every other relationship seems to fall into order. So you come and complain to me about a problem with your boss or your spouse or some other friend of yours. I avoid all those things, but I go straight to the father and the mother, and this naturally becomes all right. So you just work on these two, and everything is over.
Does the relationship with the mother affect us in one way and with the father affect us in another way?
Yes. In effect, what we have found is, if the relationship with the father is not so good, it generally manifests as financial problems and great difficulties with the material world. And with the mother, you seem to encounter needless problems, things get delayed, and relationships break down. So it manifests very differently. That's why we focus both on the mother and the father.
So for really good success on Wall Street, people should attend to their relationship with father. Okay.
When Indian businessmen come to us and say, our businesses are not doing well, we basically look at the father's relationship for the financials to turn around. And if the business is not progressing well, we look at the relationship with the mother. And 3 or 4 months later, the picture has changed. So we have probably thousands of examples to show it's really working, even for big companies.
Yeah. But what about if your mother or father is already dead? Then what can you do?
It doesn't matter at all. You still start relating to the dead parent. So it's not important the person should be alive or dead. You just get those memories back and you work on that.
So you can clear the relationship within yourself,
within yourself, yes.
I see.
But in India, of course, we do make them meet their dead parents also. It's more like meeting them physically. But we have not done that with the Westerners so far. But with Indians, we have done that. Because in India, they believe in past lives and rebirth, and that you have other lokas where you can meet them, So they're very comfortable with meeting their dead parents. We have no clear idea how a Westerner would feel talking to his dead parents.
Another topic we'll talk about later is the ultimate possibility of this, because many people now in Europe or America, they experience benefit in their lives, but I know that Deeksha is also pointing towards an ultimate flowering.
Yes.
Could we say just briefly now, give a little taste of this topic, and then we'll return to it at a later talk?
So we believe that ultimately the Deeksha would lead to what we call oneness. That is, you would lose the sense of separation. and that people would feel like as though they all belong to the same family. So we believe the world would become one global family. We see that as the ultimate happening.